many people, when they take on that leadership role, they realize, oh, wow, I'm working a lot harder, way more hours, I'm stressed. And that plays into a lack of happiness, which starts to mess with your security and all of those things. When you start putting it together, it becomes a real mind game to people.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. After I left my career as a journalist more than 15 years ago now, I went to work at a software company, first as a project manager, then as a sales engineer, and eventually the director of sales strategy. Now, that last position was a bit made up, to be honest. It was this nebulous world between working with individual sales team members on specific deals, helping guide and shape our go-to-market efforts, and yet not actually leading a team other than one other sales engineer. But eventually, after about 4 years at the company, the vice president of sales and marketing approached me with an offer to become the director of marketing. The current director of marketing had just accepted a new position at a different company, and if I wanted the role, he said it was mine. I was astonished. I'd never done marketing before. How in the world could I lead an entire marketing team without ever having been formally trained in marketing? The VP, who in full disclosure was a former roommate of mine in college, he told me, well, they don't need someone who is better than they are at marketing. They need someone to lead them. That comment reverberated with me. Well, I can do that, I said. And I took the job. And I've been a marketing leader at companies large and small ever since. This story of how I got into marketing leadership perfectly encapsulates the conversation I have with my guest this episode, Tony Chatman. Tony is the author of the book, The Force Multiplier, How to Lead Teams Where Everyone Wins. A force multiplier is a tool used to exponentially increase output. Think of a wheelbarrow or a pulley. Or in the case of a leader, someone who positively impacts the performance of those in their charge beyond the bounds of what they can individually contribute. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. My first marketing team all those years ago didn't need me to be the best marketer in the room. Each member of the team needed to be set up for success in their roles, so they could meet their goals, both company and individual. Tony and I discuss his journey to leadership and why he's so passionate about building up leaders who recognize that their role is not about being the best performer on a team, so they get to now lead that team. It's that they have the ability and desire to get the best out of everyone through building trust, loyalty, and respect. And before you skip over this episode because you don't hold a vice president or owner or CEO title, Tony is intentional about this. The majority of leaders are supervisors, team leaders, or managers, or perhaps parents, community leaders, or volunteers. It's not about the title. It's about what you do with the responsibility. We were just talking right before we started recording here that your book, The Force Multiplier, came out in 2017, 4 years ago or so now. What has changed in terms of how you view leadership over the last 4 years and everything, the mountain of things that we as a society have gone through. Can you break it down? Like what's changed in your view?
Yeah, I don't know that the principles have changed all that much, Michael. I think there are certain things that are universal. I think really, though, what's the last few years have made me do after writing the book is go back and strip down the hows into the whys, right? It's so why is this so important? And they really come down to just a few things. Number one, there's a level of self-confidence that a person needs to have when they step into a leadership role. And I don't mean in an arrogant way, but what happens is leadership really does magnify not only our weaknesses, but our insecurities. And so what can start to happen is people who are not secure, they put themselves above those that they are leading instead of viewing it as a position. And so then they look down upon, talk down to, do all these other things to other people, which actually ends up sabotaging their leadership, but they're doing it so that in the moment they feel better about themselves, where if they'd already felt good about themselves, they wouldn't need to do that. So that's kind of the first thing. And then the second thing, I've always known that resilience is really important, right? And the ability to kind of survey the landscape of the world around you and be able to adjust and adapt on the fly. And it's funny, I was listening to one of your previous episodes and you talked about commitment bias, right? That there's this idea that people commit to the thoughts and behaviors that they have committed to or said, especially publicly. And I think that people's ability to let go and move and be the right person at the right time for the right people is so critical. And so those are the things that for me, it's not that the book has changed as much, but I think if I could rewrite it now, I would go back and really dig into a little bit of the psychology and the importance of, understanding who you are and not having to adapt who you are to become a better leader, but to understand you're changing some of your strategies and tactics so that you can better connect with people.
What is missing in our professional day-to-day, where so much of what you just talked about, Tony, is so rampant that we elevate ourselves above those who are in our charge to make ourselves feel better as a guide or a gauze over the fact that we don't feel qualified, we don't feel ready? What is missing from our work culture that's happening so much?
I mean, some of it, that's a complicated answer, right? So some of it is, okay, so person's a good worker, they get promoted to being a supervisor. Often it's not because, wow, you showed such great supervisory potential. It's really because you outperformed people in contributing in whatever you were doing. If you're a CNC mill operator, that's what you're doing. If you're a marketer, that's what you're doing. Now you're a supervisor, and that's a different skill set, right? And so one of the challenges is in that transition, people don't really get trained, right? They just get thrown in and they're thought, okay, I'm going to do this kind of by nature. But I've realized there's a weird side effect to that as well. If you were promoted because you were out contributing those who are your peers, you can start to believe, oh, that means I'm better than them, right? Because I got promoted because I outperformed them. And so now I'm the supervisor. And this is where those who are better, this is where we reside. And now that's my rank. And so now my the supervisors are my peers, and the people I'm supervising, those are the people I was better than. And, I never really thought about it until recently, but I think that plays a big role. And then there's I think there's a cultural thing that's put into it, right? So back in 1911, Frederick Taylor wrote The Principles of Scientific Management. And that's basically the predecessor to Six Sigma. It's there's a scientific way to lead people and to, be, more effective if you use principles of science in there. But one of the side effects to his theory was he believed that people were lazy and didn't want to work, right? And so now it was the managers who were motivated and wanted to work, and the people were lazy. And I think that there's a remnant of that that's still here, because you'll hear people say, well, I can't find any good people, or, people are lazy. This new generation, all of these things you hear, I think that there's still some residual effect from this scientific management principle thing that had really been a mainstay for years. So I think that there's a lot of it. And then I just think people are stressed, especially now. We've been going through a pandemic and a shutdown. And, murder hornets, can't forget murder hornets, right? You start going through all of the stuff that we've been through, and we're at an elevated stress level. And so you add all of those things together, and it's kind of created this perfect storm of, man, I'm just happy to be here. I've got to hold on to what I've got. It's the imposter syndrome thing, where imposter syndrome is another real thing. Like, most of us really battle it because and maybe you've experienced this or maybe you've not. When you start hitting a level of success that's different than what you've had before, you start to wonder, okay, do I deserve this? Did I earn this? Am I ready for it? And we often view our peers through very distorted lenses. That's the same way we view people through social media. So now it's, man, they've all got it together and I don't, and I'm afraid to tell anyone. And so then that insecurity plays in as well. And I just think there's all these things that are pushing in on it. And if people just had a chance to sit back, first of all, do I even want to be in leadership? Let's be honest. It's not for everybody. Okay. Number two, I need to be invested in or invest in myself. I need to actually learn this thing and figure it out and figure out what makes a good leader, what hinders people from becoming great leaders. And then third, I got to make sure I'm taking care of myself, because, many people, when they take on that leadership role, they realize, oh, wow, I'm working a lot harder, way more hours, I'm stressed. And that plays into a lack of happiness, which starts to mess with your security. And all of those things, when you start putting it together, it becomes a real mind game to people. So I know that was a lot, but I think there's a lot there.
And dang, man, I hadn't thought of murder hornets in a long time. So
right.
Thanks for bringing that back up.
That was a big thing for like 2 weeks.
I remember a part of your book where you were talking about how it's interesting when you juxtapose it with that 1911 study that you just referenced on how it was seen as the workers were lazy, when actually, we've kind of got this mentality that being a supervisor is synonymous with doing nothing. Like, where did that breakdown happen? Because I think of the stereotype. You see the construction crew on the side of the highway. There's 5 people standing around, and they're all, people make the joke, oh, well, we have 5 supervisors out here today, and they're the ones doing nothing. Where did that breakdown happen?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I can't fully tell you the origin. I can tell you some thoughts, because that's a big one, right? It's like you help someone move. If someone's being lazy, goes, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm supervising, right? It's okay, great. I think there's a false expectation of what being in a supervisory or management position is. I've actually heard people, especially in more of a manufacturing role, say, well, my supervisor should be able to do my job better than I do. I thought to myself, no, that's not the goal, but those thoughts are there quite often. And so then when people see their supervisor doing things that are different than what they do, they're okay. Now my supervisor is actually doing all this paperwork, and they're dealing with budgets, and they're dealing with projections, and they're doing performance evaluations and all these things, but I don't see them working. And especially you add that into, there's already a bit of a gap between us because of what we said earlier, then it's easy for me to start looking down on them as a defense mechanism and saying, well, see, they're not really working. I'm the one doing all the work. And so I think that plays into it, but I couldn't really point my finger on the exact origin.
Yeah. Tony, I want to take a little bit of a step back here and ask you why. Why did you get into this? Why is leadership and this idea of leadership multiplying others so important to you?
There's the book answer and there's the real answer. So the real answer is when I talk to people, I rarely hear people say, man, I have a great boss. It's just a rarity. I rarely hear people say, yeah, I had two really good bosses in a row. I mean, that's almost like, seeing a Yeti, or Bigfoot or something. And I realize that, gosh, for most people, they spend more of their waking time at work than any place else. And I know we hear that in a way that's almost cliche, but we spend more time with our coworkers and more time with our supervisors. And in reality, those work relations have a huge impact on the quality of our lives, because we often take home the baggage from all of that other stuff. And if we had a bad day at work, it leaks into our home life and our parenting and our marriage and my pet, my social life, whatever. And there just came a point in time where I thought, there's a lot of things I can talk about and a lot of things I do talk about, but in most companies' quest to be more profitable, they're sacrificing their employees. And if we could figure out that, you hear, human capital and human resources, those are great buzzwords. They're very rarely lived by. If we can really view people as the real asset and really take care of them and understand the better taken care of, not only the better our company will be, but the better they will be, which means that not only will they contribute to our company, they're going to contribute to society in a way that's very different. To me, that moves me. That to me is really important. And, when I say you rarely hear it, I traveled the country for years just doing management training. And I heard the same complaints over and over and over again. And I realized it's not that this is like mega complex, but it's just not natural. And if people aren't trained and prepared for this, then what they end up doing is hurting the people that they supervise while also damaging themselves. And I just think that there's a better way to live.
Have you had good bosses, good supervisors, or did you have the typical, I'll put it in air quotes, experience of bad? And is that what motivated you to dig into this?
So it's interesting. I was actually thinking about this earlier. My first boss, so I was a chemical engineer in college. And in my college internships, I did 2 in a row for the same boss. And he was a great boss for me. Can't tell you whether he was a great boss in general. Fantastic for me. Got out of school. I had a variety of bosses. And I've actually thought to myself, okay, number one, I can't even imagine going back and having a job, right? I could having someone to report to. But then I thought there's probably 2 people that if they asked me, I would at least give it some thought, right? I haven't had a lot of I have had a couple of horrible bosses too, right? I was going to say, no, I haven't do that. And I thought, oh yeah, I did that. That time that I thought I'm going to end up going to jail. Sure, I had a bad boss. Absolutely. I don't know that motivated me as much. It probably did to some extent. I just tried to figure out, where do I contribute? Because in my mind, I'm really trying to figure out always, where do I fit into the big scheme of things in our society, in the world, the whole thing. I think that's really what drew me.
I'm struck by the part in your book where you talk about the low engagement numbers at work. And you pose the question, why do we accept this at work? We wouldn't accept this anywhere else in our lives. We wouldn't accept a 36% approval rating or success rating from our pilots. Why do we accept it at work? Why do we? I've got to ask that question. Why do we accept it at work?
We've normalized it. We've heard the numbers so often that we've normalized it. Engagement's at an all-time high of 33%. That's a third. That's not good, but it's an all-time high. That's great. But It's horrible, right? If you go into the doctor and your doctor says, hey, everything's good except that your heart is working at 33% capacity, you wouldn't like leave and go to McDonald's and think you're having a good day. You would stop and like, whoa, we've got to freeze. But we've heard it so much, and we have such a low expectation of people that we just like ingest it and normalize it and say, this is what it is. And it shouldn't be this way. And I guarantee you, if managers understood the human connection better, those numbers would skyrocket. But yeah, we've just accepted it. Oh, and one other thing. Here's another reason we've accepted it is because we always blame the workers and we never blame the supervisors, right? If and I do get into this in my book, I understand that. But let's for a minute say, okay, I'm a supervisor and I do this one thing and it works, right? Now I'm like, that's the key to supervision is me doing this one thing. And so the next time I do it, it doesn't work. I don't go back and say, maybe that thing I did was wrong. No. The thing I did was right. It's those people. If they were better workers, then they would respond to my awesome leadership techniques. And so we got to get better workers in here because it certainly can't be my amazing leadership.
In the context of what's going on right now, the Great Resignation, as it's being called, are managers, supervisors, companies, and organizations facing a reckoning because we're finally realizing 30 to 40% engagement is not okay? Is that what we're going through right now?
I do think that that's part of it. Yeah. I think people, when you go through a once in a generation, once in a lifetime event, hopefully that we've just gone through, yeah, hopefully, it makes you reevaluate everything, right? You recalibrate things, you assess. I think a lot of people have said, you know what, I can't put up with this anymore. And so that is leading into a great reckoning. I think people said, here's what's important: family, my own health, my own mental and emotional health, my relationships. Yeah, I want to contribute to the world. And I think many people still want to work, but their tolerance for what they'll put up with has diminished drastically.
In the context of that, what you just said and your previous answer and how managers view it as the worker's problem, let's put you in one of these organizations where you have workers resigning, leaving, even though they don't have another job lined up. What does a manager or a supervisor in that situation do? What can they do? What should they do going forward?
Oh boy, so you start off, let's say I'm put into one of these companies and now I'm a new supervisor and it's bleeding rapidly. So my first thing I'm going to do is spend some time getting to know my team, like really, and building trust. That's going to take a lot of time because they're going to treat me the way they've treated their previous supervisor for a period of time. So I've got to really earn some trust. But I need to be able to understand and have a relationship and think, okay, when I say relationship, we don't have to be best friends or anything, but there's a connection we need to have and a mutual trust and respect that we need to have. And hopefully that will breed loyalty. Then I need to have a better understanding of what they do and how it ties into their role and how it ties into their role and into the big picture. And when I say what they do, I don't mean what they're supposed to do, but their perception of what they do and their perception of where they play into the role. Because one of the problems is people don't often see that what they do has a great impact on a larger scale. They just say, okay, I am over here making sales calls, or I'm over here doing this. And at some point, I'm going to get an evaluation on how I'm doing, but I don't really see that I'm making a difference. So I would want to really have that conversation. I would also, I would really reevaluate this is where it gets kind of messy. I'd reevaluate what everyone's doing in their position and make sure they're all in a good fit. That doesn't mean losing people, but maybe having some conversations about restructuring what people do, who does what, and allowing people to really work in their strengths. We use that phrase in an almost cliche way, but we often don't give people a true chance to work in their strengths. And so to figure out what are their strengths, not necessarily from a major assessment or anything, but just kind of figuring out in conversation and seeing what people enjoy doing and realizing there's going to be times where you can't do everything you enjoy. But what if you could spend 40 to 50% of your time at work really doing the things that you love? And the other 50 to 60% are doing things that are kind of ancillary, but they need to be done so you can do those 40 to 50% of things. To me, those conversations would be important far before compensation. I think right now people are thinking, well, we got to pay people more. When you've been around for a while, when you're in a good situation, and even if someone offers you more money, all money ain't good money. It's if I can be in a good situation where I actually like my coworkers, I like my job, I to some extent believe in the organization, even if we're not doing something that contributes to society, but we're not doing something that makes me cringe. I could believe in what we're doing, and I believe that I'm contributing. I think people want to do that, and I think that would be how I would approach it.
Why was having a boss not for you? You referenced your chemical engineering internships. I know you worked as a chemical engineer, and I want to understand that story and how you came to leave that and your education at the time behind. But why no boss for you, Tony?
Me now?
Yeah.
There's a saying that when a slave tastes freedom, they can't go back, right? I think I'm at a point in my life and an amount of self-awareness for myself that I realize I need to, number one, I'm a creator and I'm a builder. And I want the opportunity to create and build. I also realize in many ways it's very difficult to be an employee and to really be compensated for what you bring to the table or what you earn. Okay. There's that point. But then there's also a point where I feel like at this stage in my life, I'm bringing other people into my organization to help them become something, right? And there's a freedom I have to do that. So, my director of operations, I'm watching her flourish, right? I'm super excited about it. I have 4 trainers that I'm onboarding that, if we get a couple of the contracts that we're looking at moving forward, their entire lives will change. Their lives will change financially, which will help their children, their legacy. But not only that, just their stress level would decrease because they don't have to think about the burdens of figuring out money, and yet they'll still have the freedom to do other stuff. I mean, there's a lot to it. I just think that for me, and here's the key to it, for me, right? Because I am a person with a lot of self-evaluation. I like flexibility. I'm not big on having to work in a super structured environment. I am constantly, I love interacting with customers, peers, employees, all of these other things. And there's very few opportunities I would get in a workplace to do all of the things or many of the things that I think that I'm both good at and that bring me joy. But I can create those positions as a business owner.
Can you dive into why you left your job as a chemical engineer?
Oh, it's deep. Let's go. Let's roll.
Go.
So because I didn't go from being a chemical engineer to doing what I'm doing. There's a lot of intermediate steps. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've rarely told this story on a podcast, but I think I maybe told it once. So we're going to have this conversation. So I'm a young chemical engineer. I moved to Chicago. I'm literally living the life I want to live. I travel about 60% of the time, all on company expense. I have an apartment on Michigan Avenue overlooking Lake Michigan. I have no debt. I'm like, this is the dream, baby. And a few of my friends started volunteering for this program. And it was a program for Cabrini Green. Cabrini Green, for those who don't know, was at the time the second largest housing project in the United States. Okay. So, a lot of poverty, a lot of, minorities, a lot of, it's just kind of like this space, but there's also great people there. And so there's a number of programs that have been started, and some of my friends were volunteering. I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And I just started my MBA at University of Chicago. I'm like, cool, this would be a great way to give back. And so we started this mentoring program. We'd go every Sunday. We spend 2 or 3 hours with children who were between, I think it was like 5 and 8 or 9. And, some of it was just, hey, giving them some time to do things and giving their parents some time away. But some of it is they're building relationships and getting a vision of what they could be in the future. And, many of us were young Black professionals, and, we're doing pretty well with our lives. And I remember, because we started really building relationships with these kids. And there was one day, there was this kid named Osi. And Osi was like, this kid had it. Like, this is the kid that if he would walk into a room, everyone would eventually gravitate towards. He just had it socially. He had it intellectually. He was just that kid. And I had never seen him unhappy, right? He's always like this ray of sunshine. And this one day he's just really down. I'm like, all right, what's up? So I started talking to him. Hey, OC, you okay? He goes, no, I'm okay. And he just keeps doing his projects. I'm like, OC is not okay. So I remember I took him across to Seward Gym. It's a little, indoor gymnasium, and like, let's just shoot some baskets. And so we're just, we're shooting, we're doing our thing. And finally he started to open up, and I said, okay, so OC, what's going on? He goes, well, it's my mom. I said, okay, so what's wrong with your mom? He goes, well, she's gone. And so I just kind of froze, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gone? And I was like, so she died? He goes, no, she didn't die. But, basically what he was starting to tell me is that his mother was struggling with drugs and that she would binge and vanish for 2 to 3 days at a time. Okay. So it was like, I'm just tired. I've been taking care of my 1-year-old brother. I wasn't able to go to school the last couple of days. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to OC. I'm like, OC's 8. This is his life as an 8-year-old. And I'm thinking to myself, here's this kid who, in the right situation, the sky would be the limit. And yet he can't even go to school on some days because he has to take care of his 1-year-old brother. What are his chances of success? And it just, I couldn't shake it, right? To go back to work. I'm working on this project. We're about to get a new $7 million client, great. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm making money for some people, but what about these kids over here, right? And so as I got, now gets even funnier. So, I started dating, got engaged, got married. And it turns out my wife and I, we knew each other from, various relationships, but it turns out she was also volunteering at Cabrini Green in a similar program, one of the sister programs. And we started talking about everything, and we decided we were going to leave our well-paying jobs because she was in hospital administration. I'm a chemical engineer. And we're going to work in nonprofit, primarily in faith-based nonprofit. We want to do something to help the community. So we took like a 66%, it's either 66 or 67% pay cut. Okay. Living in downtown Chicago 3 weeks after getting married. So that's like the ultimate recipe for, people say this is what causes marriages to not work. And yet, 27 years later, here we are. But we made that decision, and I won't say that it was the best decision of our lives. I mean, we did it for a good decade, and I think we did a lot of good. And we also got very burned out and got frustrated with some of the bureaucracy and all these other things. But in retrospect, that decision to change was so hard that it made every other decision to change look easy. And so now when it was like career decision, all right, we became far more nimble and flexible and resilient. So when the faith-based nonprofit did it for about 8 to 10 years, my wife was suffering physically. So she was diagnosed with fibromyalgia after like 8 years because it was always misdiagnosed. And finally, the doctor said, okay, here's the deal. The stress level you're under, because at the time we were leading a ministry of like 500 people. We were training ministers to go speak across the world. We're working with some governments. I mean, we were just doing all this stuff. It's like, basically, if you don't like get in a less stressful environment, she's going to die. Pretty much that's it. So, and at the time we were getting frustrated anyway. So we left and I started a business with a friend and it went pretty well. But then, 9/11, the markets, all this other stuff was going on. And I just realized it wasn't for me, right? And I'd kind of played around with, I was working in the financial industry and I was, working with a couple of hedge funds. I was like, I can't do this. So a friend of mine who owned a temp firm, got me a job as a mechanical engineer. It's not chemical engineering, but a mechanical engineer. And it was just temp. And so I was doing it and it took like 2 weeks for me to go, yeah, I can't do this. This is not it. I don't know what it is, but it's not this. And so now this was the life-changing moment. So I called up my best friend. I said, okay, we need to have a meeting. I need you to get these 4 people together and we need to have a brainstorm on what I need to do. And this was kind of my executive advisory board for my personal life. And I'll never forget, we go over and we're at a friend's house and we're just kind of chatting it up. We start. And so one of them asked kind of the proverbial, if you could do anything in the world and get paid for it, what would it be? And in my mind, I was thinking about business development. Okay. But before the thinking part of my brain could react, I reflexively said, man, if I could do anything, I'd figure out how to get paid speaking and helping people. Didn't know it was a real business, but it just kind of spurted out. And so I said that, and then I said, because I was going to say, but because that's not an option, I think business development. Before I could get but out, the whole conversation changed. And 3 weeks later, I was in Bermuda opening for Les Brown. So that's kind of was the genesis of everything. And so it really started off with that initial seeing OC, right? And I realized 2 things, okay? A, it was seeing OC. And from there, I've been pursuing how do I help people and make the world better, okay? That was one stream of it. The second stream is I realized throughout my career, I had always used my ability to communicate, to think fast, and to take things that were complex and make them simple as my leverage, right? When I was a chemical engineer, I wasn't the best researcher, but because I think outside of the box and I communicate well, I got my first patent, right? When I did, ministry and faith-based charity, it was my ability to speak and communicate. When we started in the finance thing, yeah, we were really stockbrokers, but after a couple of meetings with hedge funds, we convinced hedge funds to let us train their trainers. It was, again, me leveraging that communication ability. So those 2 strands are the things that really led me to who I am today.
Do you know what happened to OC?
No idea. And in fact, like I said, I've never said this on a podcast except for one other time, but even in my TED Talk, I bring up the story with hopes that one day I'll find out.
Does he drive a lot of the work that you still do today?
Not personally, but he is a prototype, right? So it's not that I wish I could go back and find and fix OC, which I do. There's hundreds of thousands of OCs out there who never get an opportunity. And here's the wild thing. So, I think about OC in the framework of being in, a housing project, right? But there are also a bunch of OCs who are in, low paying jobs who have the ability to blossom and flourish into something else, but they'll never get that opportunity. And so OC becomes kind of a prototype of, man, we're trying to fix the OCs on a lot of different levels.
What do people in new manager, new supervisor roles need? How do we train them to understand just how critical they are, as you were talking about earlier, to the happiness and well-being of the people within their charge? How do we train better leaders?
So first, I think we have to redefine leadership, right? We often define leadership. You think of all the ones, leaders have followers, leaders make more leaders, leaders could turn the ship. And all of those are good, but they lack. And a number of years ago, I was having a conversation with a close friend. Now, this isn't just any old friend. At the time, we were really tight. And not only he and I, but our wives were very close. His young children viewed my older sons as older brothers. And so you can imagine how heartbroken I was when I found out he was once again being deployed to Afghanistan. So we decided to have a party at my house. It's kind of a going away, but we're going to be there for you party. And so about 30 to 40 people at my house, and we're eating, we're drinking, we're laughing, we're crying. And then there was a moment where we went around and shared. And, it was, we're going to stay in touch. We're going to make sure that your children are taken care of and your wife is taken care of. And, anything that's a need, they're going to be protected. We got you. And there's one person I was waiting to hear from. He was a high-ranking officer in the Army. I think now he's a lieutenant colonel or colonel. Got to find out. I'm not sure. But he said something because he had been to a lot of these, he termed them deployment parties. And he had been to a number of them before. So I knew he'd say something really unique, a perspective that we didn't have. But the first words out of his mouth were, "You're what I call a force multiplier because by your presence, you make everyone around you better." And I paused and I replayed it in my mind like 4 or 5 times. I don't even know what he said after that, but I kept saying, "You're a force multiplier because you make everyone around you better." Now, I knew what a force multiplier was. It's a tool, right? It's a hammer or a lever. It's something where you exert a certain amount of force, but because of that tool, the output of force is greater, it's multiplied. But people, never heard that referred to as a people thing. And so I really started thinking, what if we started telling leaders, okay, your role is not to manage people. Your role is not to, do this or do. Your role is to make everyone that you supervise better. And that's what we want you to invest your time, your energy, your resources into, is making them better individually and better as a team. When I thought about that, that changed the game. And so now people would enter into leadership with a different perspective. You lose the hierarchy mindset, right? It's not that I'm better than you. My role is to continue in your growth. And you know what's going to happen? In doing so, you're going to make me grow. It's going to be a really cool thing. It's kind of symbiotic. But then what starts to happen is you realize, okay, leadership then is people-driven, not thing-driven. So I need to work on relationship type things. So now I really do need to be a better communicator. And by better communicator, not just the ability to express my ideas, but express my ideas to different people in different conditions and different circumstances to get the result that's needed. It just changes things. Now you start to think, wow, okay, people in general are different. Like you and I are both human beings, but I guarantee you we're very different from one another, right? So to think that one leadership technique or style is going to make everyone respond, wow, maybe I need to start to figure out how people are different and how to adjust my leadership style to take care of them in different ways and to make sure that I'm motivating them. Understanding what it means to be engaged, understanding now what it means. If I'm here to make them better, then that means I'm kind of always on. I can't just emotionally take a day off and, be a jerk and whatever. That does damage. Now, I can be transparent and tell people I'm going through things because that's very human, but that paradigm shift is so strong. And so now people would, I believe, if they understood that, they would focus on things like, okay, from a personality style, how are people different? Okay, because I need to understand that. And then communications, because I need to be a better communicator. And then understanding delegation, which, okay, well, what do I need to understand about delegation? Well, number one, most people don't like to delegate. And if you ask them why, it's two simple things. I could do it faster myself, and I want it done the right way. And when they say the right way, they mean my way, right? But if you teach the people that, no, there's actually an art and a science to delegation. It's not just telling people what to do, but if you understand it, then you're going to, over time, not have to do the work because it's going to be done right the way you want it. It's going to be done quickly because you're not the one doing it. And in doing so, now you're training other people and making them better. And in some ways, replicating yourself so that in the future, when you're promoted and you're given another opportunity or you leave to go somewhere else, there are other people who will step up into that role to continue your leadership legacy. And so I think that paradigm shift is the beginning, and then it opens up the door to everything else.
Tony, what do you think of this thought that has been repeated in the business community quite often, and people are told this all the times, that you are replaceable, you are not indispensable, so hold loosely to your job, your role, whatever it happens to be. What do you think about that?
You're definitely dispensable and replaceable if you're not a force multiplier. That's what I would say. If you make other people better, it costs to lose you. You know what I mean? It's like now you're no longer a commodity. You are a value add. And so I think the phrase is manipulative, but it kind of goes back into not really viewing people from the standpoint of being true human capital and value. We're basically saying, like I heard someone refer to customers as, they're like light bulbs. One burns out, you just screw another one in. It's like, it's not a good way to do it. But unfortunately, I think people do that. But that's also now, that goes back to our understanding of why there's that reckoning, right? So you've been telling me I'm replaceable all this. You've been telling all of us we're replaceable all this time. So replace all of us. We're not coming, right? I mean, it's one of those types of things. But I do believe that, A, organizations need to value people better. B, when we're great contributors. So a little secret, today is my wife's last day at work. Okay. She gave her notice 2 weeks ago, and there's been crying. I mean, it's like the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. I mean, because my wife is an amazing supervisor. I would consider working for my wife. I mean, she's that good. And, they did kind of some sharing like a week ago. And it was, heart-wrenching because people were like, you made me believe that you could be a nice person and a great leader at the same time, right? I mean, stuff that you want people to say, but you don't hear them say that often. She's leaving. She ain't replaceable. You know what I mean? And there's a fallout now. There are other people who are leaving also because they're realizing, wow, if she's not staying and she's not just toughing this thing out and fighting, gosh, I think maybe there's other options there for me. People are realizing they have real options, because going back to your original question, Michael, part of the reason people say that is because there's this expectation that employees are supposed to be more loyal to their company than the company is going to be to them. That's really how things are set up. Or I'll say how Les Brown told me. We were at LaGuardia Airport, and he said, and I've heard him say this publicly too, so it's not just to me, but he said, don't make someone a priority who's clearly made you an option, right? I think that is part of what's happening is organizations communicated for years, you're an option. We got other options. Okay, fine. Then you're going to be an option too. And that's not going to play out so well. So I think that's really what's happening here.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah,
though?
go ahead.
I forgot to mention. So I mentioned it's my wife's last day.
Yeah.
Because starting tomorrow, she's my chief operating officer of my company, and we get to work together. We're kind of riding into the sunset together. So I wanted to make sure I gave her her props and made sure people understood why she's leaving her job.
There we go. Congrats to you guys.
Thank you.
One of the things, Tony, that struck me the most in your book was this idea and notion of you cannot communicate with someone based on, and not cannot, that's a strong word, but communicate with someone based on what they value and what they believe and what they hold true versus what you do. How did you come to understand that that is so critically important to getting things done?
I think two things. One was, so I've got this friend who he had never dated. I'm probably told this story before, but he had never really dated ever. And he ended up finding the right person. They got married. And then it was Valentine's Day. And he was calling me and goes, hey, I got, I almost said her name. I got my wife this great Valentine's Day present. Now, he'd never had a girlfriend for Valentine's Day. And at first I was like, okay, great. I got stuff to do. But he kept like talking about it. And then when I finally asked him what it was some kind of power tool, like a jigsaw or something. And I was like, what are you doing? He goes, well, she'll love it. I love jigsaws. She'll love jigsaws. And I realized because he'd never been in that type of relationship, he literally thought everything that he liked, she would like. And he never translated that. No, I have to give you gifts based on what you like and value, not based on what I like and value. But that's how we communicate, right? We communicate the way we want to be communicated to us. That golden rule, do unto others, right? We've learned that. So part of that was, as funny as that was, it was eye-opening. I'm like, because I think in terms of like parables and universal lessons. So I'm like, so how does that apply? Like, wow. The second thing is we went to a marriage retreat, young in our relationship. And we learned about personalities. Actually, we learned about the 4 temperaments from Hippocrates. And I remember sitting there because the whole idea was that you have 2 different personalities coming together and forming a marriage. And I remember thinking, okay, this is really powerful stuff. And in fact, because we ended up doing a lot of premarital counseling and things like that, we started using this temperament idea. But then I realized, okay, wait. This is not just about marriage. This is about life. We're constantly interacting with people who are different than we are. Our children, do you have children, Michael?
I've got 2. Yeah.
You got 2. Are they the same?
They are total and complete 180 opposites of each other.
Right. They're totally out. And if you parent both of them the exact same way, it will work for one, maybe, but the other is going to be a disaster, right? And so I started thinking, no, this is more universal. This is marriage. This is parenting. This is French. This is why I cannot get along with that person. Now it makes sense, right? And so now I'm looking at this from a different perspective, and it's okay, there may be a better way to do this other than temperaments and personalities and whatever. But so those 2 things together kind of open my eyes. This is an issue with a lot of marriages because the idea is that often the people that we think are difficult are just different. They're not difficult. They're just different, and we need to think differently with them. But wow, now the way I communicate with people, before I just assume that they want to communicate the way I would, let me learn a little bit more about them. And oh my goodness, it opens up doors. It makes things so much more clear. And so that's really that was the genesis of that idea.
You have just encapsulated so much of what this show is about, man, in that answer. So I thank you for bringing the heat to wrap us up here, man.
Absolutely.
Final question for you, Tony. What's a question that you wish you were asked more? So right now I do a lot of work with unconscious bias.
Okay. And it fits within this idea of the force multiplier because it's many times we're good at leading certain people, but other people get left out. And we're realizing, especially in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you start dealing with race, gender, sexual identification, level of ability, all of these things, people get left out, but it's not always intentional. So dealing with unconscious bias and inclusion, we're doing a lot of work. But there's a question, and it ties back into where we started today, that I wish people would ask. Why are some people more susceptible to being biased than others? Why are some people who are raised in the exact same household, they're really inclusive while others discriminate? Why? And I believe part of the answer is that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we talk about leadership, when we talk about team building, we're really dealing with the symptom, not the core issue. There's a researcher at Cornell, and what he's done is very unique. He has linked a person's understanding of their purpose and their mission in life and said, okay, the more a person is like that, the less likely they are to discriminate. And I could show you quantitatively. So the less likely they're to be homophobic, misogynistic, racist, xenophobic, just down the thing. And although it's new data, it totally makes sense, right? If I'm confident in who I am and where I am in this world, I don't need someone to look down on to make me feel better. But now we can quantify it, right? We can say, this is a real thing. So I wish people would ask, why? Why with that, right? Kind of how you started with leadership. Why? Because it's the same thing I said about being a leader, right? It's the more confident we are and the more complete we are and the more baggage we've let go of, the better we're going to be with people because we're going to be better people. And so I wish people would do that because I think that as I am starting to look at my future, I'm going to continue doing the things I'm doing, but I see myself transforming into, I do think this idea of authenticity, wholeness, personal development is important because many of these things that we're seeing are indicators that that's what's really broken. And so often we fix the indicator instead of fixing the true issue.
Do you know who that researcher at Cornell is?
Anthony Burroughs.
Anthony Burroughs. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, Tony, if somebody wants to follow along as you explore what that future is for yourself, where can they find you? Where can they go to follow your work and connect with you?
So I'm about to get really heavily into Instagram again. I mean, I've always been on it, but I realize I like Instagram. So Tony Chatman Speaks, and it's Chatman, Chatman. But Tony Chatman Speaks, because somebody had already gotten Tony Chatman on Instagram. But other than that, you could find me at TonyChatman.com. I mean, that's the beauty of having the internet. TonyChatman.com has links to everything, all my social media. We're starting a really helpful, I don't want to call it a newsletter, but I'm really trying to give people a lot of value in a lot of different ways. And that's going to be kind of the HQ for everything. So if you go to TonyChatman.com, you'll kind of get to everything and you can go from there.
Wonderful stuff. Tony, thank you for your time today. I have greatly enjoyed the conversation, and let's keep in touch, okay?
Absolutely, Michael. Thanks for having me. Honored to be here, and I appreciate all you're doing.
So many thanks to Tony for sharing his story and his insight on the show today. Please do me and Tony a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to today's conversation. Perhaps they like leadership topics, and this is right up their alley. Share this episode with your network. Share it on LinkedIn. Share it on Twitter. Help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Tony Chatman that I have on each and every episode, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Subscribing also helps the show gain more reach, which is definitely a good thing for me. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. You can also sign up for my free newsletter, The Follow-Up, at my website. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.